I'm Rachel Sydlowski and I'm based out of New York City. So I started off working primarily in ceramics and I tried to continue that in New York City, but it just became impractical because of the cost and the sort of like burden of the objects. So I switched to screen printing and printmaking, and I sort of just stumbled into it in graduate school. I was just taking it as an elective. But it became like this tool that I really enjoy using. And it's funny because I use a lot of screen printing, but I wouldn't call myself a printmaker. Like, I don't really feel I'm in tight with the printmaking community, probably because I use screen printing in a pretty unusual way. So for now, I create these like large scale installations that utilize screen printing and sometimes furniture forms and other sculptural elements. I'm really interested in nature and history and pattern. And I have really broad interests, but lately I've been pursuing this kind of like the nexus between nature and more like urban environments in the way that nature can exist in an urban environment. And I think this probably just grows out of my experience growing up in Providence and kind of like this post-industrial New England, where there was this really industrial landscape, but the landscape had changed, industry had left, and the buildings were being reclaimed by nature. And also in New York City, I live at the top of Manhattan, which has the last old growth forest in New York City. So there's still remnants of like, sort of like what Manhattan possibly looked like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but it's like very small. And I think that is like something I find incredibly interesting, is the layers of history that can exist in a place. And they're there, but you really have to go looking for them. So in terms of a message in my artwork, I try not to be too didactic. I don't want to ever be prescriptive in my work, but I do try to address difficult issues through beauty and try to start conversations that may otherwise be difficult. I think like art can be a political act, but you can do that in a variety of ways. For me, I think it certainly is like a quiet form of activism, but I try to draw people in through beauty and community. I think, you're never working alone when you do something at the scale that I do, so that you have a group of people that you always have to work with. Like, you're not acting alone. More so than art, I think, I'm an art teacher at a high school, and I think that's a really that's a more accurate description of being an activist. I think every day in the classroom is an act of activism, and I think the two things maybe kind of go hand in hand. I don't think necessarily that there's always like a hard line where you say like, this is my life, this is my activism, this is my art practice, and this is what I do for a job. For me, like the whole thing kind of goes together. So the artwork that I created for this exhibition, Wind Spirits, is called Vivarium. And you can think of it as kind of like a living terrarium of animals and plants. And this show or exhibition is really about the migratory patterns of birds and how they change because of the dire environmental circumstances. So it seems, especially you get this sense living in the city, that there's like fewer and fewer places for wildlife to exist, or that it shifts really rapidly. And in creating this space, it was almost like creating this really beautiful garden or vivarium to preserve these disappearing plants and animals. So in a sense, it kind of like personifies like the shrinking natural world and how it's such an important resource, and we have to be really careful about the way we proceed into the future.